Have you ever felt a place wasn't just abandoned, but waiting? Samuel Vargas, a struggling mechanical engineer, accepts a high-paying but eerie assignment to evaluate an old factory shut down decades ago after a series of gruesome accidents. The building, nestled deep in a forgotten industrial valley, has a reputation as cursed among locals. They speak of machines turning on by themselves, shadows moving in locked rooms, and workers disappearing without a trace. But Samuel, desperate to rebuild his career, dismisses the warnings. With a team of 5 workers, he enters the colossal gates of the factory, its rust-covered metal groaning, as if resisting their intrusion. As the group steps inside, the oppressive atmosphere is undeniable. The air is thick with the acrid stench of oil and mold, and the faint echo of grinding metal seems to come from nowhere. Dust swirls in the dim light seeping through shattered windows, casting fleeting shadows on the walls. Samuel brushes it off as paranoia, but his gut tells him they're not alone. One of the workers, Geraldo, mutters under his breath, "I heard stories. This place doesn't forgive." The deeper they venture, the colder it gets, as if the factory itself were exhaling icy breath. The silence is unnerving, broken only by the sporadic drip of water echoing through the vast, empty halls. Samuel notices faded safety posters still clinging to the walls, their messages hauntingly ironic. Safety first, lives depend on it. But what catches his attention most are the dark stains splattered across the concrete floors, stains too large and too old to be oil. Just as Samuel begins briefing the team, an ancient alarm bell clangs from somewhere deep in the factory. The sound is deafening, metallic, and it reverberates through their bones. Samuel rushes to silence it, but when he reaches the control panel, it's completely dead, no power, no wires connected. It's just old systems failing, he assures the group, though his voice wavers. He doesn't mention the fleeting shadow he saw darting past him, too large to belong to any of them. If you're ready to uncover the chilling secrets of this nightmare factory, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And tell us in the comments, would you dare step into a place like this? The first night falls like a suffocating shroud over the factory, plunging everything into an eerie silence. The team sets up camp in the main assembly hall, a vast and cavernous space where their flashlights barely reach the ceiling. The workers light portable lamps, their dim glow creating long, twisting shadows on the rust-covered walls. Samuel, sitting with blueprints sprawled before him, tries to focus, but an uneasy feeling creeps up his spine. The oppressive quiet feels unnatural, broken only by the distant, rhythmic sound of dripping water. Suddenly, a faint metallic clang echoes from the depths of the factory. Samuel freezes, his pen hovering above the paper. "Did anyone hear that?" he asks, his voice cracking the fragile stillness. The others exchange uneasy glances but shrug it off. Geraldo, the eldest of the group, chuckles nervously. "This place has a way of playing tricks on your ears," he mutters. But Samuel isn't convinced. The sound was too deliberate, too precise, like a machine coming to life after years of dormancy. As the group settles in for the night, strange things begin to happen. One of the workers, Pedro, wakes abruptly, gasping for air and drenched in sweat. "It's nothing," he insists when questioned, but his wide eyes betray him. He later admits that he dreamt of standing in the very same hall, surrounded by machines, their gears grinding louder and louder until they drowned out his screams. Samuel brushes it off as nerves, but his unease deepens when he notices something peculiar. Pedro's hands are covered in grease, though he hasn't touched a single machine. Later, while making his rounds, Samuel hears a faint whirring sound coming from a corner of the hall. His flashlight cuts through the darkness, revealing an old lathe machine, dusty and lifeless. Yet, the whirring persists, growing louder with each step. When he finally reaches it, the noise stops abruptly, plunging him back into silence. Just as he's about to leave, a chilling breeze brushes past him, though no windows are open. It carries a faint metallic smell, like blood mixed with rust. As the team gathers for a late-night meal, the tension is palpable. Geraldo begins telling stories about the factory's history, his voice low and conspiratorial. "This place wasn't just shut down because of accidents," he says. "They said the machines here developed minds of their own. Workers claimed they heard voices coming from the gears, begging them to stop." The group laughs nervously, but no one truly believes he's joking. Just as they're about to turn in for the night, an ancient alarm bell rings out once more, louder and more insistent than before. This time, it's not a random malfunction, it's rhythmic, deliberate, as if warning them of something. The workers scramble to locate the source, but Samuel's flashlight catches something that freezes him in place. In the distance, a figure moves among the shadows, too tall and mechanical to be human. His voice barely a whisper, Samuel tries to call out, but his throat tightens. The figure stops, turning its head toward him. And then, as if fading into the darkness, it disappears. The last thing Samuel hears before the alarm cuts out is a faint metallic whisper, "You don't belong here." As the second night unfolds, the oppressive atmosphere in the factory deepens. The air feels colder, heavier, as if the building itself resents their presence. Samuel lies awake, unable to shake the feeling that unseen eyes are watching. The others are restless too, tossing and turning in their sleeping bags. The dim light from their lanterns flickers, casting distorted shadows that crawl along the rusted walls. A sudden, faint noise interrupts the stillness, a slow, deliberate creak of metal. It echoes through the factory like a groan of something alive. Samuel rises cautiously, his flashlight trembling in his grip. The sound grows louder, almost rhythmic, like the grinding of ancient gears. He steps into the corridor, the beam of light slicing through the suffocating darkness. The long hallway ahead seems endless, the walls streaked with dark stains and jagged scratches, as if something clawed at them in a desperate frenzy. His footsteps echo ominously, each one swallowed by the eerie silence that follows. As he ventures deeper, he feels the cold intensify, like a frost creeping into his bones. The sound of grinding metal abruptly stops, replaced by a faint whisper. At first, it's indistinct, like the wind brushing against rusted pipes. But as Samuel strains to listen, he hears words, a low, guttural voice muttering in a language he can't recognize. The sound seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, making his pulse race. Suddenly, a metallic clang erupts behind him. He spins around, but the hallway is empty, his flashlight revealing only the swirls of dust stirred by his movement. Back in the main assembly hall, the workers are having their own nightmares. Pedro jolts awake screaming, clutching his chest as if trying to remove something unseen. His terrified eyes dart around the room, but he refuses to explain what he saw. Geraldo, pale and visibly shaken, claims he heard someone calling his name from the factory's depths, though no one was missing from the group. A younger worker, Miguel, points to a dark corner of the room and whispers, "There's someone standing there." But when Samuel directs his flashlight, there's nothing. Then the machines begin to stir. First, it's a faint hum, like electricity coursing through long dead wires. The air fills with a sharp, metallic tang as if the factory itself is exhaling. One of the ancient conveyor belts jerks into motion, the rollers screeching as they turn, though there's no power source connected. The workers huddle together, their breaths visible in the freezing air. Samuel tries to reassure them, but his voice falters as the sounds escalate. A distant siren wails, rising and falling like a lamentation, and the rhythmic pounding of a hydraulic press echoes from deep within the factory. Desperate for answers, Samuel decides to investigate the source of the noises. He follows the sound of the press, which grows louder and more oppressive with every step. His flashlight reveals strange markings along the walls, symbols etched into the metal, pulsating faintly with an unnatural light. They seem almost alive, twisting and writhing as he approaches. The closer he gets, the more his chest tightens, as if the very air is resisting his presence. Finally, he reaches the source of the sound, a massive hydraulic press, its pistons pumping steadily. The machine's surface gleams unnaturally, free of the dust and rust that covers the rest of the factory. Samuel approaches cautiously, but his foot catches on something. Looking down, he recoils in horror. Beneath him lies a trail of footprints, greasy, barefoot prints that lead directly to the press. And then he sees it, a handprint, smeared with a dark, oily substance, pressed firmly against the machine's control panel. Just as he's about to turn back, the press suddenly stops. Silence envelopes the room, thick and suffocating. Samuel's breath catches in his throat as he feels a presence behind him, cold, heavy, and watching. Slowly, he turns, his flashlight revealing nothing but empty space. But in the faint glow of the machine's control panel, a message has appeared, scratched into the metal in jagged letters. "Leave before we remember." Samuel stumbles back, his heart pounding, as the press roars back to life with a deafening crash. He runs, the pounding of the machine chasing him down the corridor, growing louder and more erratic, as if the factory itself is alive and angry. When he bursts back into the assembly hall, the workers are huddled in terror, their faces pale. One of them points toward the far wall, where deep claw marks have appeared, fresh and glistening, carving a single word. Stay. The group realizes they are no longer in control. They are being watched, judged, and played with by something far more sinister than they can comprehend. The factory descends into chaos as the fourth night begins. The workers, exhausted and on edge, refuse to sleep, huddling together under the flickering light of their lanterns. Samuel, however, can't ignore the nagging pull to uncover what is happening. Against his better judgment, he decides to explore the deeper levels of the factory, hoping to find an explanation. With every step, the air becomes heavier, pressing against his chest as though the factory itself is trying to suffocate him. The corridors twist unnaturally, defying the layout Samuel had memorized. What should have been a straight path becomes a labyrinth of rusted staircases and crumbling hallways. His flashlight flickers, casting erratic shadows that seem to move independently of his light. A low hum begins to rise, almost imperceptible at first, but soon deafening, like the droning of 1,000 machines coming to life. Samuel stops in his tracks when he hears it, a voice calling his name, soft and distant, yet distinctly human. He follows the sound, each step echoing, as if the factory is amplifying his movements. The voice grows clearer, shifting from a whisper to a desperate scream. It's coming from a massive metal door at the end of the corridor. The door is old and rusted, but fresh handprints, slick with an oily red-black substance, are smeared across it, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. Samuel hesitates, but the screaming intensifies, resonating in his skull. When he pushes the door open, the air rushes past him like a gasp from the building itself. Inside is a cavernous chamber filled with machines that defy logic, massive, twisted constructs of gears and pistons that seem almost organic. They pulsate with a faint glow, a sickly yellow light that seems to throb like a heartbeat. On the far side of the room, he sees them, the workers who had disappeared. They're standing motionless, their eyes wide and unblinking, staring straight ahead. Samuel calls out to them, but they don't respond. As he approaches, he realizes with growing horror that their skin is pale and translucent, their veins visible beneath the surface, glowing faintly with the same yellow light. One of them suddenly jerks its head toward him, its neck creaking unnaturally, and whispers in a hollow voice, "You shouldn't be here." Before Samuel can react, the machines roar to life. Gears grind, pistons pump, and the room fills with the deafening noise of industry. The workers begin to move, their motions stiff and jerky, as if they're being controlled. Samuel stumbles back as one of them reaches for him, its fingers elongated and dripping with the same oily substance as the handprints. He realizes they're no longer human. They've become extensions of the factory, their bodies fused with its machinery. In a panic, Samuel flees, the workers pursuing him with inhuman speed. The corridors seem to stretch endlessly, twisting and reshaping themselves as he runs. The walls close in, and the air becomes stifling, filled with the acrid stench of burning oil and metal. Just as he thinks he's lost them, he stumbles into a smaller room, a control center of sorts, with monitors that flicker to life as he enters. The screens show live feeds of the factory, but what he sees chills him to his core. The cameras aren't just showing the present, they're replaying events from the past. Accidents, mutilations, and deaths, all caught in grotesque detail. Samuel watches helplessly as one screen shows a worker crushed by a hydraulic press, the man's screams echoing through the room. Another screen displays a fire consuming the assembly line, workers clawing at the locked exits as the flames engulf them. Then the screens change, showing Samuel and his team. Each monitor plays out their worst fears. Pedro screaming as he's dragged into the gears, Geraldo begging for mercy as the machines encase him in metal, and finally, Samuel himself, standing before a massive machine as it whispers to him in a language he doesn't understand. Suddenly, the room shakes violently, and a voice booms from the speakers, deep and guttural, as though the factory itself is speaking. "Your time has come. You will join us." The door slams shut, trapping him inside. The machines in the room begin to activate, their gears turning and sparks flying. A large piston inches closer to Samuel, and he realizes it's not just threatening him, it's hunting him. In a desperate attempt to escape, Samuel spots a lever near the door labeled "Emergency Shutdown." He sprints toward it, but the room seems to stretch, the lever pulling farther and farther away. The piston looms closer, its metallic surface gleaming like a predator's teeth. Just as the machine is about to strike, Samuel leaps forward, grabbing the lever and pulling it with all his strength. The machines stop. Silence falls, heavy and unnatural, as the lights flicker and dim. For a moment, Samuel thinks he's succeeded. But then he notices it, the faint hum returning, growing louder and more menacing. A shadow appears on the wall, impossibly large and distorted, as the voice whispers one final time, "You can't stop what has already begun." The room plunges into darkness, leaving Samuel alone with the sound of his own heartbeat and the faint, mechanical laughter that echoes through the factory. When Samuel finally stumbles out of the control room, his heart pounding and his breath shallow, the factory feels different. The oppressive air has grown heavier, almost suffocating, and the corridors are darker, the faint yellow glow from the machines pulsing like a heartbeat. As he moves through the labyrinthine halls, his flashlight flickers, casting jagged shadows that seem to stretch and twist unnaturally. He clutches the lever he pulled in desperation, now a broken, rusted piece of metal, as though it's some kind of anchor to reality. Samuel's first instinct is to check on the remaining workers, but when he reaches the assembly hall, it's empty. Their sleeping bags lie scattered, as if they left in a hurry. One lantern still burns dimly, its light barely piercing the gloom. He notices something strange. The floor is covered in oily footprints leading in all directions, some human, others disturbingly large and clawed. As he examines them, he feels a chill on the back of his neck. Someone or something is watching him. His unease deepens as he spots Geraldo's notebook lying open on a nearby crate. Inside, the pages are filled with frantic scrawls and drawings. There are sketches of the factory's machines, but they're warped and grotesque, almost organic, as if alive. Words are scratched into the margins in shaky handwriting. It's feeding on us, and the machines remember. The final page is a warning, written in large, uneven letters. We are not the first. Samuel feels his stomach drop as he flips back a few pages and finds something chilling. An old photograph of a group of workers standing proudly in front of the factory. But their faces are eerily familiar. One of them looks exactly like Pedro, and another bears an uncanny resemblance to Geraldo. The realization hits him like a punch. The factory is repeating history, pulling people into its cycle of terror. Determined to escape, Samuel searches for the workers, following the oily footprints through the factory. As he ventures deeper, the noises grow louder, clanging metal, grinding gears, and the faint sound of voices crying out in agony. He reaches a massive storage room where the footprints abruptly end. The room is filled with rusted machinery, their surfaces slick with oil that drips onto the floor like blood. In the center of the room stands a towering machine that seems out of place, its design far more advanced than anything else in the factory. Its surface pulses with an unnatural light, and its gears move slowly, as if it's breathing. Samuel approaches cautiously, drawn by a strange compulsion. As he gets closer, he notices something horrifying. The machine is covered in human-like features. Faces are etched into the metal, their expressions twisted in pain and terror. Eyes that should not be there seem to follow him, and mouths open silently as if screaming. One face stands out, Pedro's. His eyes blink once, and his mouth moves silently, forming the words, "Help me." Samuel stumbles back in horror, but the machine reacts, its gears grinding faster and its lights growing brighter. Suddenly, the room is filled with whispers, overlapping voices that grow louder and more desperate. The voices plead, cry, and scream, each one telling a story of suffering and loss. Samuel realizes these are the souls of the factory's victims, trapped forever within its walls. Desperate for answers, Samuel spots a stack of dusty files in a corner of the room. As he flips through them, he uncovers the truth about the factory's past. It wasn't just a place of industrial accidents, it was an experiment. The factory's owner, a reclusive inventor, had designed the machines to harvest energy from human fear and pain, believing it could power his creations indefinitely. The experiment spiraled out of control, and the factory became a tomb, trapping the souls of its victims within the machinery. Samuel's hands tremble as he reads the final file, which contains a list of the factory's subjects. His name is on it. The date next to it is today. The lights in the room flicker violently, and the machine roars to life, its gears spinning at an impossible speed. The whispers turn into screams, and Samuel feels the floor tremble beneath him. A shadow rises from the center of the machine, amorphous and writhing, its edges sharp and metallic. The shadow speaks in a voice that echoes like grinding metal. "You are part of us now." Samuel bolts from the room, his mind racing. He realizes that every nightmare, every strange occurrence, has been orchestrated by the factory to break them, to feed on their terror and claim their souls. As he runs, the walls seem to close in around him, the corridors shifting and twisting. He bursts into the assembly hall, where he finds Geraldo standing motionless, his eyes blank and his skin pale. Samuel shakes him, but Geraldo only mutters, "We don't leave." No one ever leaves. Suddenly, the siren blares again, deafening and relentless, and Samuel realizes he has no choice but to face the truth. The factory isn't just haunted, it's alive, and it's hunting him. Samuel's breath is shallow as he sprints down the factory's endless corridors, his footsteps echoing like gunshots in the suffocating silence. The oily air clings to his lungs, and the walls seem to pulse, narrowing and twisting as if the building itself is alive. The whispers follow him, disjointed and overlapping, growing louder with every step. They seem to seep into his mind, telling him to stop, to give in. But Samuel pushes forward, clutching the files he found, desperate to make sense of the horror around him. In his frantic search for answers, Samuel stumbles upon an old maintenance room. The space is littered with rusted tools, broken monitors, and faded blueprints pinned to the walls. A faint light flickers overhead, casting eerie shadows that shift unnaturally. On a dusty desk, he finds something chilling. A journal, its cover stained with what looks like dried blood. The entries are written in shaky handwriting, growing more erratic as they progress. The journal belonged to the factory's previous foreman. It details his descent into madness as he realized the machines were becoming self-aware. "The factory speaks to me now," one entry reads. "It knows my fears, my memories. It promised me release, but it only wants to consume." The final entry ends abruptly, smeared with what appears to be claw marks, as if the writer was dragged away mid-sentence. Beneath the journal, Samuel finds a crumpled photograph. A group of workers standing outside the factory, their faces eerily familiar. One of them is Geraldo, but he looks exactly the same as he does now, unchanged despite decades having passed. Samuel barely has time to process this when the whispers intensify, swelling into a chorus of screams. The sound is deafening, reverberating off the walls and shaking the floor. The room grows colder, frost forming on the metal surfaces. A sudden, guttural voice booms from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You cannot escape. You belong to us." The lights flicker violently, and the room plunges into darkness. Samuel's flashlight flickers to life, casting a narrow beam that seems to illuminate more shadows than light. In the corner of the room, something moves, a grotesque shape that seems to shift and writhe, its form barely human. Samuel's heart pounds as the figure steps forward, revealing a face he recognizes, Pedro. But it's no longer him. Pedro's skin is pale and translucent, his eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light. His movements are jerky, mechanical, as if controlled by invisible strings. "Help me!" Pedro croaks, his voice distorted and metallic. His hand stretches out, but Samuel steps back in terror. As Pedro's form dissolves into the shadows, Samuel realizes the truth. The factory is absorbing them, piece by piece, turning them into extensions of itself. Determined to find a way out, Samuel remembers a strange detail from the journal. A cryptic note about a heart buried deep within the factory. "Destroy the heart, and the nightmare ends," it reads. Clinging to this shred of hope, Samuel decides to confront whatever is controlling the factory. His journey takes him deeper into the building, where the air grows thicker and the walls appear to close in, losing a dark, tar-like substance. The sounds of grinding metal and distorted voices fill the air, but Samuel presses on. He reaches an old service elevator, its doors rusted and barely functional. The control panel is covered in more of the strange symbols he saw earlier, glowing faintly. With a shaky hand, he presses the only working button, and the elevator descends. As the elevator creaks downward, Samuel feels a growing sense of dread. The whispers return, but now they are clearer, more direct. They call his name, taunting him, recounting his deepest fears and failures. His flashlight flickers, and for a brief moment, he sees reflections in the elevator walls, images of himself being torn apart by gears and consumed by darkness. He closes his eyes, willing the visions away, but they linger in his mind. When the elevator doors open, Samuel steps into a massive underground chamber. The space is dominated by a colossal machine that seems to pulse with life, its gears spinning rhythmically like the beat of a heart. The air vibrates with its power, and Samuel feels a crushing weight pressing down on him. The machine's surface is covered in human faces, their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes following him as he approaches. In the center of the machine, a dark, swirling core glows faintly. Samuel knows this is the heart. He takes a step forward, but the room suddenly erupts with noise. The faces on the machine begin to scream. their voices merging into a deafening wail. Shadows rise from the floor, forming grotesque, twisted figures that lunge toward him. Samuel fights through the chaos, dodging the shadowy figures as they claw at him. He reaches the machine and spots a lever near its base, labeled manual shutdown. But as he grabs it, the machine speaks, its voice deep and metallic. "You cannot stop us. Your fear sustains us. Join us, and your suffering will end." The shadows close in, their cold, oily hands grabbing at Samuel. He hesitates, the lever trembling in his grip. The machine's voice becomes softer, almost soothing. "You've suffered enough. Let us take it away." For a brief moment, Samuel considers it. The weight of his fear and exhaustion feels unbearable. But then he hears another voice, faint and distant, yet familiar. It's Geraldo, screaming from somewhere within the machine. "Don't listen. Destroy it." With a surge of determination, Samuel pulls the lever. The machine lets out an unholy roar, its gears grinding to a halt. The room shakes violently, and the shadows dissolve into smoke. The faces on the machine contort in agony before fading into the metal. The glowing core flickers and dims, and for the first time, the factory falls silent. Samuel collapses to the floor, gasping for air. But as he looks around, he notices something unsettling. The walls are still pulsing faintly, and the air is still heavy with the metallic stench. The factory isn't dead, it's only dormant. The nightmare is far from over. The silence in the factory is deafening, oppressive, like the calm before a storm. Samuel sits on the cold, oil-stained floor of the underground chamber, his chest heaving with exhaustion. The machine's core has dimmed, its pulsating glow reduced to faint flickers, but the faint hum remains, a sinister reminder that the factory is not entirely lifeless. Samuel knows he hasn't won, not yet. The whispers have stopped, but the air is still heavy, vibrating with a presence that feels ancient and malevolent. Gathering his strength, Samuel decides he must escape before the factory regains its power. But as he turns to leave, the chamber's walls begin to shift, groaning as if alive. Pipes twist like serpents, gears grind to life, and the shadows creep back, more aggressive than ever. The room feels smaller, the walls closing in as if the factory is trying to trap him. The floor beneath him trembles, cracking open to reveal streams of black oil that bubble like molten tar. As Samuel scrambles to find a way out, he hears a voice, a deep, metallic growl that seems to come from everywhere at once. "You think you've won," it says, each word reverberating like the grinding of heavy machinery. "You are nothing but a spark in an endless engine. You cannot destroy what has always been." Suddenly, the machine in the center of the room roars back to life, its dim core flaring with a blinding, golden light. The faces etched into the metal begin to reappear, screaming in silent agony, their eyes glowing with unnatural brightness. One face stands out, Geraldo's. His features are twisted in pain, his mouth opening and closing as though he's trying to speak. Samuel hesitates, his heart pounding as he takes a step closer to the machine. He hears Geraldo's voice faintly, like a whisper carried on the wind. "You can still stop it," Geraldo says, his voice trembling. "But it will cost you everything." Before Samuel can respond, the shadows in the room coalesce into a single towering figure. It's humanoid in shape but grotesquely distorted, its body made of gears, pistons, and metal plates that grind and shift with every movement. Its head is featureless except for two glowing orbs that burn like molten metal. The figure towers over Samuel, its presence overwhelming, its movements deliberate and mechanical. "You cannot fight what you don't understand," the figure growls, its voice filled with malice. "You were brought here for a purpose. You are the next cog in the machine." Samuel backs away, but the figure extends an arm, a grotesque appendage made of jagged, twisting metal. The ground beneath Samuel's feet begins to collapse, and he realizes the factory is reshaping itself, bending reality to trap him. He runs, leaping over cracks and dodging falling debris, his flashlight flickering erratically. He finds himself in a long, narrow corridor, the walls lined with rusted machinery that seems to pulse like veins. At the end of the corridor is a massive door, larger than any he's seen before. It's covered in the same strange symbols that have haunted him since the beginning, glowing faintly. Samuel knows this is the factory's true heart, the source of its power. But as he approaches, the shadows return, swarming around him like a living tide. They whisper his name, their voices filled with malice and desperation. Faces form within the darkness, distorted, monstrous versions of the workers who disappeared. Pedro, Geraldo, and the others reach for him, their hands dripping with black oil, their eyes glowing with unnatural light. "You can't leave us," they say in unison, their voices overlapping in a horrifying chorus. "Stay. Become one with us." Samuel fights through the shadows, his every step feeling like wading through thick tar. When he reaches the door, he finds a lever similar to the one in the control room. But this one is larger, and as he grips it, the voices grow louder, screaming in his ears. The towering shadow figure reappears, standing just behind him, its metallic form radiating heat and malice. "Pull that lever," it snarls, "and you destroy more than me. You destroy the only part of you that matters. This factory knows your pain, your failures, your regrets. It is your reflection. Without it, you are nothing." Samuel hesitates, the weight of the words sinking in. The factory has been feeding on his fear, his trauma, twisting it into a weapon against him. But then he remembers Geraldo's warning, "It will cost you everything." Summoning his last ounce of courage, Samuel pulls the lever. The factory lets out an ear-splitting roar, its walls trembling violently. The shadow figure lunges at Samuel, but before it can reach him, the door bursts open, releasing a blinding surge of light. The shadows scream and dissolve, the machinery around him collapsing into heaps of rust and debris. Samuel is thrown to the ground as the factory begins to implode, its walls folding in on themselves. He crawls toward the light, feeling the ground beneath him crumble. Just as the last remnants of the factory collapse, he pulls himself through the door and into the cold night air. Samuel stumbles into the open field outside the factory, the building behind him reduced to a smoking crater. The oppressive weight in the air is gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. But as he looks at his hands, he notices something strange. His skin is smeared with oil that doesn't wipe away, and his fingertips feel cold and metallic. He glances back at the ruins and hears a faint whisper, carried on the wind, "The machine never stops. You are part of it now." Samuel collapses to his knees, realizing the horrifying truth. While he may have destroyed the factory, its essence has latched onto him. The nightmare isn't over, it's inside him now. Samuel stumbles into the cold night air, the shattered remains of the factory looming behind him like the corpse of a fallen titan. The building is a smoldering ruin, its once ominous silhouette reduced to jagged beams and piles of twisted metal. But the night is far from silent. The wind carries faint echoes of grinding gears and distant whispers, as though the factory's essence lingers in the shadows of its destruction. Samuel clutches his side, his breaths ragged, his body trembling with exhaustion. For a moment, he allows himself to believe it's over. The oppressive weight in the air has lifted, the suffocating presence of the factory seemingly gone. But as he looks around, something feels wrong. The landscape is eerily quiet, devoid of life. The trees surrounding the factory stand motionless, their branches stretching toward the ruins like skeletal hands. Even the stars above seem dimmer, swallowed by the void left behind. Samuel feels the oil on his hands again, cold and sticky, refusing to dry. He wipes them on his shirt, but the dark substance only spreads, staining his clothes and leaving a metallic sheen on his skin. His heart sinks as he notices faint black streaks running along his arms, as if the factory's corruption is seeping into him. As he moves away from the ruins, the ground beneath his feet feels unnaturally soft, almost gelatinous. With every step, he hears faint metallic clicks, as though unseen gears are turning just below the surface. He freezes when he hears a voice, a faint, distant whisper calling his name. "It's Geraldo." "You can't run from it," the voice says, haunting and hollow. "You've only delayed what's coming." Samuel spins around, but there's no one there. The whisper fades, replaced by the faint hum of machinery, growing louder with every passing second. He begins to run, his boots sinking slightly into the soft ground with each step. The landscape twists around him, the trees appearing to shift positions, their branches now resembling the tangled pipes of the factory. The farther he runs, the more the world itself seems to transform, bending into something unnatural. He reaches a road, its cracked asphalt glistening with the same black oil that stains his hands. A single, flickering streetlight stands nearby, casting an eerie glow over the scene. Samuel collapses beneath it, clutching his head as the whispers return, louder this time. They don't just call his name, they remind him of every fear, every failure, every regret he's ever buried. The voices overlap, growing into a cacophony that drowns out his thoughts. "You're one of us now," they chant, their tone both mocking and mournful. The machine never stops. In desperation, Samuel looks to the sky, hoping for some sign of salvation. But the stars are gone, replaced by a swirling void of darkness. In its center, a faint, golden light pulses, steady and rhythmic, like the beating of a heart. His stomach churns as he realizes the light is the same glow he saw in the factory's core. The factory isn't dead. It's everywhere. Suddenly, a car's headlights cut through the darkness, jolting Samuel back to the present. A truck screeches to a halt beside him, its driver, a gruff, middle-aged man, stepping out. "Are you all right, son?" the man asks, his voice filled with concern. Samuel tries to speak, to warn the man about what he's seen, but the words catch in his throat. The driver helps him into the truck, offering him water and a blanket. As they drive, the man tries to make small talk, but Samuel remains silent, his mind racing. He stares out the window, watching the trees blur past, their twisted branches illuminated briefly by the headlights. For a moment, he begins to relax, the hum of the truck's engine oddly soothing. But then he notices something on the dashboard, a small, rusted gear. It sits there, innocuous yet unmistakable, a relic of the factory's machinery. Samuel's heart races as he realizes the truth. The factory's reach extends far beyond its walls. "Where did you get that?" Samuel asks, his voice barely a whisper. The driver glances at the gear and shrugs. "Found it on the side of the road a few weeks ago," he says casually. "Figured it might be worth something." As the truck continues down the road, Samuel begins to hear the whispers again, faint but growing louder. He grips the seat, his knuckles white, as the headlights flicker briefly. The driver doesn't seem to notice. Up ahead, the road bends sharply, but something catches Samuel's eye, a structure looming in the distance. At first, he thinks it's impossible. It couldn't be. But as they get closer, he recognizes it, the factory. It stands intact, its towering smokestacks piercing the night sky, its windows glowing with a faint, golden light. Samuel's breath catches in his throat as the truck slows to a stop. The driver frowns, staring at the building in confusion. "That's strange," he mutters. "I don't remember this being here." Samuel doesn't answer. He can't. The whispers are deafening now, drowning out everything else. The factory is waiting, its doors open wide like the jaws of a beast. The golden light from its windows pulses steadily, calling him back. The driver turns to Samuel, his face pale. "What is this place?" he asks, but Samuel doesn't respond. Instead, he steps out of the truck, drawn toward the factory as if pulled by an invisible force. The story ends with Samuel standing before the factory's gates, the light from its core reflecting in his haunted eyes. The camera lingers on his face as a single tear rolls down his cheek, mixing with the black oil that now stains his skin. In the distance, the factory's siren begins to wail, its sound rising into the night as the screen fades to black. What do you think happened to Samuel? Is the factory truly alive, or is it something even darker? Share your theories in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling stories like this one.